Alrighty, so
Thanks, Diana.
probably will not be as long tonight, but please stop me at any point. South China Sea. Again, islands, you can almost see where the island once was, originally, a little oval, how they have built up using piers, using dredges, dug up dirt, dug up rock. Now they have built a harbor here. And that's the part of the world we're talking about, right in there. Come on. There we go. Here are the main combatants, or claimants, I should say. There's not been a lot of fighting yet. But China claims all of this. This is called the 9-dashed line, informally. Why the 9-dashed line? I don't know. China said that's what it is. And they are saying that all of this is Chinese territory.
They're claiming all the islands.
They're claiming all the Spratlys, all the Paracels, Scarborough Shoal, the other ones of any size. Note where the Philippines are. There's the line of the Philippines. I mean, almost practically off their coast. Scarborough Shoal used to be held by the Philippines. Both sides agreed, about 25 years ago, to both move out. Philippines did. Philippine forces did. The Chinese did, and they claimed it ever since. Okay, so we've got Malaysia down here and over here. Two parts. They claim what you see in the blue. That's that 200-mile exclusive economic exclusion zone. In other words, no other country can go in there to mine resources or anything else without the permission of the government there. The actual 12 miles would be more like where that is, to be honest. Brunei is a sultanate with an absolute ruler, a sultan. And little tiny things, only about that big, surrounded by Malaysia. And they have their 200-mile zone, which is much bigger than the country.
Where those dots are, dashes are, does that mean that that's their part right there? And then, is that how it's separated, or what?
Well, this is saying that Brunei claims this hunk.
Right, right,
Malaysia, this hunk.
right, okay.
China saying anything inside of this dotted line
Other
is
than that,
Chinese.
including what's in there?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the overlap here. Philippines, again, you see that 200-mile exclusion zone goes through here. This also would be Malaysia. So the Philippines claim this, so does China. Brunei claims this, so does China. Vietnam claims this, so does China. This would be international waters. China says, no, that's ours too. So you've got Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia a little bit. They've kind of had a brief tussle here with a Chinese fishing boat, and a Chinese Coast Guard cutter came in and rammed the fishing boat and forced the Indonesian authorities off the boat. And this was in this region here.
Is that when they wanted to take control?
Well, there's, as you'll see, all these islands, each one of these players, with exception of Brunei, the other 5 all have forces on most of these islands. This is just the level of competing claims. I'm just trying to show the conflict, or potential conflict. Because, for example, the Philippines have that rusty freighter, I think it's out here somewhere. Which then, the Chinese are there, just waiting for the Philippine to leave so they can peacefully seize it, like they did Scarborough Shoal. This is a UN, 200-mile exclusive economic zone. These are all disputed islands. You can see where they are in purple. There's other shoals. Shoal, of course, means it's underwater part of the time. Okay, now, there are the original inhabitants of this region. were uninhabited. For most of human history, no one has wanted or lived on these islands. There's no native population, there never has been. Most of these islands do not have any natural source of water, very little vegetation. The only thing they're good for is fishing. But no real interest in this area until after World War II. Now, you do see treaties. China at one point claimed it all. France claimed it. Britain's claimed it. Japan has claimed it at different points. And occasionally on some of the larger islands, particularly up in this area, you do see some remnants of human activity. Now, I mean, they found evidence of 2nd century Han Dynasty coins and things like that here. Well, does that mean there was a settlement, or does it just mean there was a Chinese fishing boat that wrecked and was stranded? No evidence of any indigenous population. No evidence anybody really even cared. There's one point where the 1400s, where Vietnam and China both claimed both of these areas. Neither one knew the other claimed it. It was really, very low priority, off the radar stuff. Uninhabited sandy islands and shoals until fairly recently. Again, here are the differences. Oh, there we go. Okay, our boundaries. So why all the fuss? 3 reasons. Oil. That was the real driver initially. No one's really found anything. Like I said, the Chinese and I believe it's the Philippines are very convinced that there's a vast sea of under oil out there and natural gas. The American government says, in your dreams. They feel the chances of there being oil there is about 0. But that is one of the reasons why these nations are disputing. Rich fishing, but there's a big reason. Maritime trade. 1/3 of all the world's trade that goes by sea goes through the South China Sea. 1/3.
Okay.
You control the South China Sea, you could charge a little tariff, and you could really strangle Japan, or South Korea, or even the eastern part of Russia, U.S. West Coast, a lot of trade goes right through there.
Is that the area where ships were being hijacked by?
No, that was the Malaccan Straits. That's
okay.
over Malaysia.
Okay,
Malaysia and Thailand.
all right.
It's only about 12 miles wide there in some sections. And a lot of trade goes through there as well. It's a real choke point. So China's, so that is the real reason why anybody's interested in these islands. The claims of the nations. Malaysia. Here, over here as well. Their claim is 200 nautical mile, exclusive economic zone, UN, the Treaty of the Sea, which all these countries have signed, by the way. They're saying because of the treaty, it's ours. Brunei, the same. The Philippines also, because of the treaty. However, note, when Spain ruled the Philippines, up until the 1890s, Spanish-American War, when we took it from Spain, Spain never claimed these shoals or these islands. When we had the Philippines as a colony from the 1890s to 1946, we never claimed these islands. In fact, 45, not 46. And when Philippines obtained their independence in 45, we told them specifically, this is not your land. But the Philippines say, oh yes it is. Vietnam claims from the 1400s, they claimed it back in the 1400s. Some of these islands here were inhabited by Vietnamese, therefore they have the right to this boundary, which goes a little bit further out, you'll notice, than these. It's larger than the 200 mile because they're claiming some of these belong to Vietnam. Okay, well, the Philippines, Vietnam, okay, China. 2nd century Han Dynasty, Tang Dynasty. You find some artifacts from that time period in here. Chinese fishermen have been going down in here for millennia. But there's no evidence they ever built anything or ever claimed it as Chinese land. It was just islands they fished off of. Not a lot of evidence down here. Now, in the 1500s, there was a Chinese admiral who built one of the largest wooden fleets the world had ever seen. And he sailed through here. Actually went down through here, up there, visited India, evidence he went all the way over in Africa. On the basis of those artifacts and his voyages, and due to some things in the 1880s where the Western powers said that some of this did belong to China, they are claiming the whole thing. Now, here's the interesting thing. Taiwan. Taiwan is nationalist China. If you remember, nationalist China and it used to be Red China, People's Republic of China, they fought a civil war. The nationalists were forced on the island of Taiwan. They're still technically at war. But when it comes to this, Taiwan and China agree. This is all Chinese territory. But remember, China claims Taiwan, Taiwan claims all of China. Because technically the war's never ended. There's been a truce in place for, gosh, since 49, I think. A couple of islands, Macau, what have you, not Macau, but a couple of small islands here Taiwan still controls, just off the Chinese mainland. But both China and Taiwan agree, all this is China. And to complicate matters, some of the biggest islands in these two chains have Taiwanese garrisons on them. They date back from the early 40s, the end of the Second World War. The nationalist China, which then was the mainland China as well, put a few garrisons down here. They're still there. So that's the lay of the land, if you will. But to really understand why China is pushing so hard here, why China is taking and dredging up sand from the seafloor and rock and what have you to build up shoals into islands, putting runways on them and putting in military installations throughout the area, and being pretty aggressive. Every time a U.S. warship goes through this region, China lodges a formal protest against the U.S. for having entered their territorial waters. Now, they've not tried to block trade. They have not tried to impede international trade at all, but any national warship goes through here, China's squawking.
Was that the situation during the Vietnam War also?
Yep.
And there was a lot of complaints then, there had to have been.
Yeah, there were. Although China didn't push it like it is now. They're pushing it harder than they ever have. Now, this area here, that one disputed island and a couple others we can't see because it's just too big a resolution, was controlled by South Vietnam. And in the late, 74, just before South Vietnam fell, the year before, China started building up some military capability here. South Vietnam sent some frigates over. They had a battle here. They had a series of battles. China won. So now those islands that were Vietnamese are now occupied by China. Now the communist government of Vietnam wants them back. And the communist government of China is saying no way. It's interesting how, interests here.
Everything's moving back and forth.
Yeah.
Well, we think because they're both communists, therefore they're friendly.
Not
That's
necessarily.
not the truth at all.
Nope. Not at all.
There's a lot of iterations of communism anymore.
Yeah, there's been a few battles fought between Chinese and Vietnamese troops along their border. It's been kind of quiet lately. It was kind of wild that even during the Vietnam War, there were a few battles fought between China and Vietnam over border issues. Both countries backed off. Neither one wanted it to go any further. Vietnam is, the government of Vietnam, the communist government of Vietnam is reaching out to the United States every way it can. They want us back. They want us to put bases back in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Why? To offset China. So far, we've been we'll think about it. But Vietnam wants to be our friend because Vietnam fears China. Which China's tried to invade and conquer Vietnam more than 3 or 4 times in history. So they have reason to. Anyway, one of the reasons I brought this up is, you know, a misstep, a local battle gets out of control. We have treaty agreements with the Philippines, with Malaysia, not so much with Vietnam. Definitely with Taiwan.
And Japan.
Right. So, you know, if China were to impede navigation, we could get into a shooting war with China. That's the danger here.
Oh.
Because if you don't come through these straits and go into the South China Sea, you have to basically go down and around, going through the Indonesian islands.
The treaty you're talking about is the old CETO Treaty,
Yeah.
Southeast Asia. That's supposed to be a complement to NATO.
Well, that CETO is pretty much gone. There's ASEAN now, the Association of Southeast Asian
It's
States.
a residue of it.
Right, which we're not part of. The old CETO we were.
But the treaties under CD still hold, don't they?
Mainly
As far as
what,
we're concerned.
well, not so much that as the UN treaty with the law of the sea. It was an international agreement the UN backs, and we signed it, Vietnam, China, Taiwan, everybody signed it.
Yeah, but those are not mutual defense treaties.
No, they're not. We don't have a mutual defense treaty with Vietnam, to my knowledge. Malaysia, not with Malaysia either, or Indonesia. We have some ties. Our main ally
Would be the Philippines.
in this map is Taiwan and the Philippines. But if China gets too aggressive here and the Philippines get into trouble and ask for help, we are obligated to help the Philippines. It could
We're
get ugly.
obligated to help China?
No, no.
Philippines.
Oh, the Philippines.
You know, if this in the old days, if this was not sea, it'd be called a land grab.
Okay.
But to understand why China is so insistent is where we get into the area of beliefs. So far, some pretty straight, real politics stuff. But China, the historical name for China is the Middle Kingdom. It has always viewed itself as the most civilized and the dominant power in the world. Now remember, for most of Chinese history, until the Western Europeans showed up, China was the big boy on the block. All the nations surrounding China were fairly small and weak. Russia had not moved over to the eastern part yet. In through here were various kingdoms and what have you. There was the Khmerian kingdom in here in the 1300s, but still, overall, China was the dominant player.
Their only adversary was the Mongols. wasn't it?
Yeah, 12th century, yeah. About 100 years, the Mongols ruled China. But for a lot longer, particularly in the Han period, which predates the Mongols, the Han emperor was getting sick and tired of having to send the army to go out and drive off the Mongols. You know, drive off the barbarians. So they arranged it, they came up with an interesting arrangement. The Mongol leaders would acknowledge the Chinese emperor as their overlord. Okay? And they would come once a year and they would bring symbolic gifts of tribute. And they left with twice as much as they came with. They were being bribed. China has a long history of feeling we are the superior nation, we are the dominant nation. All the other nations in our neighborhood should say, jump. When China should say jump, all these nations should say how high. They should recognize China as a nominal overlord and know their place. And in return, China will be very generous. So basically, China is saying, this is ours. What is your problem? Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam. You are not acting like proper vassal states. And that's where we get to belief. This is a Chinese belief. So because some emperor sailed there in the 1500s, it's all yours, it's ludicrous. International courts ruled that this area belongs to the Philippines last year.
The international.
International Court. Philippines took China to the International Court of Justice. And they ruled in favor of the Philippines. China said, we ignore it. It's not valid.
Aren't the, if the international courts, is that separate from the UN?
Yeah. The Hague. It's related. I mean, they do work back and forth, but it is separate.
All right, are all these smaller
Mhm.
considered countries, they're all members of the UN
Yep.
because
Yep.
they've just been here?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, throughout most of Chinese history, Vietnam had to send tribute to China, even if they got more back sometimes. They always had to acknowledge that China is superior. So the Chinese culture has a massive superiority complex. They're the most cultured, they are the most civilized, they know how to do things right. And China's attitude is, we will allow you to exist and allow you to go about your business, but if we want something, you better back off. So China's population is very supportive of this. They feel it's just right. It's just the natural order of things. Very Confucian. You know, there's this natural order of things that one should maintain. And that's China's position. It's coming right out of Confucianism.
All right, is China completely, oh, now I just lost the word. I'm on with something else. I can't think of it now.
Okay.
Talk about the religious,
No, not religious,
Mm-hmm.
like Russia.
Communist?
Hmm?
Communist?
Communist.
Yes, that's what makes it more
I
yeah.
have it on the tip of my tongue and then I lost it.
That's what makes it interesting. This is an officially atheistic state. It tightly regulates all religions, tightly controls them, including Confucianism. Yet when it comes to their territorial ambitions and how they treat other nations, they're Confucian. The older attitudes and beliefs are still there, even if the religion isn't. So this is difficult because to ask China to give this up would be like asking a woman to shave her head. Yeah, you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it willingly.
I'll think about it.
is there a gun pointed at me?
Yeah, that's what I mean. It would take a gun pointed at China.
There's another thing going on, I think, too. China has a reason for that thought, their superiority. In fact, 3,000 BC, they were the only civilization
That's right.
extant.
They were the oldest.
They were the oldest, and they were superior to anything we can trace in the Fertile Crescent in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Probably Egypt would be the only thing predating them.
Some of the Middle Eastern.
Some of the Middle Eastern, perhaps, yeah.
But unlike the Egyptian and unlike Middle Eastern, unlike Europe, which went through a dark ages, there's a cultural upheaval. You had the old Roman system in England, and throughout England and much of Europe.
Much of Europe, yeah. Southern
But when the barbarians overran it, the culture changed. When Islam took over much of the Middle East, the culture changed. China hasn't had that.
No.
China has had a continuous culture from 6th century BC. And that's unusual.
The Mongol rulers never bothered with the culture. They just wanted their tribute.
All right, where was Mongolia?
To the north.
To the north.
Yeah. If China is here, Mongolia is up in here, the steppes. Desert, high plateaus, grassland, great for horses. Mongols were expert archers on horseback and could shoot at distance while going on full gallop with a bow.
And very mobile. There's a word
Yes.
for it.
Highly mobile.
Yeah, but there's a word for that. Transient, that's not it either. They lived in types of tents.
Yeah, the yurt.
the yurt, which they can tear down and move within about
Yeah.
2 hours.
Yeah. Mongolian cavalry were very mobile. They could dismount and fight as infantry, and then get on their horses and be gone. So they had a mobility that no other army could match, which is why they conquered so much. They literally go around and hit you from behind. I mean, it just, very difficult. Took a while. Also, they had a compound bow that shot farther than anybody else, so they outranged you. So it was actually, ironically, the barbarians who had a technological advantage, which is why they did so well, but I digress.
Yeah.
But even with that, the Mongols had no real formal culture of their own. They just absorbed Chinese culture. They spoke Chinese.
That's what I was.
The culture conquered them, even though they conquered China. Chinese culture conquered the Mongolians. Much as Rome conquered Greece, but Greek culture conquered Rome. Something similar there. So China feels a divine right to rule, to be the dominant power. Not to literally conquer and rule all these countries, but that these countries should bow down to the overlord. Needless to say, these countries aren't interested in doing that. And they look for help from outside. Guess who that is more than anybody else? United States of America. The main thing go ahead.
I was just saying to digression, but is quite possibly the way we are viewed in the United States is viewed in the Middle East.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
I say it's quite possibly at least similar to the way the U.S. is viewed in the Middle East.
As an outside power that can help us get what we want.
Yeah, and it's trying to dominate us and blah, 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 all this kind of thing.
Yeah. Mainly what we do is we send warships through. We call them freedom of navigation transits, China protests. There have been a couple of incidents where there was an American reconnaissance plane flying through this area, and a Chinese fighter jet got so close they collided. The Chinese jet crashed. The American plane crippled, made an emergency landing in Hainan Island. And we got our plane and our crew back in about 9 days. Enough time for them to go over everything and learn as much as they could.
I remember that, yeah.
Battle of Parcel Islands between South Vietnam and China. There's been some skirmishes in this area. So far, peaceful. But it could get out of hand. So,
All right, now, China is close to Korea,
yeah, Korea would be up in this area.
right?
Korean Peninsula, Japan would be over
Could
here.
you back to
Just-
your original
okay,
map,
north
and I
and
think
east.
you can see it.
Can I? Okay, let's see.
You come very close to seeing it back there.
Mhm.
His original map, farther back, farther.
Because you were talking about.
Yeah, there we go.
that- you were
Yeah, there's
talking-
Korea.
See
Yeah,
it,
you were
North
talking about
Korea,
that
and
before.
there's China right over.
Right, this is China.
Yeah, we were talking about that the first week.
Right.
Korea and China.
Korea. And you can see from this map why this is a preferred trade route.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Otherwise, you have to go down,
And
and
around,
this is not the best route, probably around.
yeah.
You're gonna spend a lot more oil, it's gonna cost you a lot more money.
Take you a lot
Plus-
longer.
All this is because of all these small islands, this is all Indonesian territories. You don't wanna pay any kind of an Indonesian tariff.
Mhm.
And generally, in the South China Seas, isn't the weather, if you will, calmer, more stable?
Yeah. Although there can be some typhoons that come through here who are particularly
Oh, yeah,
nasty.
it's just like they come through the Caribbean.
Yeah,
It's
it's-
still generally, the Caribbean is a nice
Yeah.
sea to sail on.
Yeah. But for most of human history, this sea, the only value of those islands was for navigation, so you didn't hit them. You'd want to have a good map so that you could avoid getting into trouble. Come on. I had to sit up so I could push the button and it would work. And then, of course, I do it now, it doesn't. Come on. There we go.
That's not reading you right, huh?
Okay. So what do? Here's another island. You can see what they've done.
Okay.
Landing strip.
Yeah, you can see the
That looks
shoal.
Like you could make an.
That's the atoll.
air strip on that.
Yeah, that's the coral reef. So that's where the waves are. They build it up, they put seawalls around it, and really went out into the sea and made it long enough to have a runway.
That's a couple harbors down on the bottom.
Yeah, a couple harbors now cut out, dynamited the coral reef to have harbor. So basically, it's an unsinkable aircraft carrier, but it doesn't move.
Unsinkable?
Yeah, you can't sink it, it's an island.
It's an island, it's there.
You can destroy the air runway, you could take over it, but you can't sink it.
You could flood it.
Well, maybe global warming will, but militarily, not a lot that the United States can do, other than what we've been doing, and that is rights of navigation, treaty arrangements. So far, we've stayed out of this to a certain extent, other than kind of telling China, no, you don't own it, kind of forcing China to back off a little bit, which they resent greatly. To get in there more forcefully militarily would risk a major conflict where everyone would lose. Economic,
Fish.
it's in our interest to keep the trade going.
There's a trade routes, is really the economic part of it.
Yeah. It's more valuable to the United States for the trade to go through regardless of who owns it. I mean, China is connected to the global economy. The trade gets cut off, China gets clobbered too, along with everybody else. So it's in their interests as well. So that leaves probably this as being the main option. We, continue to have competing claims. I really didn't show the islands, but if these were colored in by the country that owned them or occupied them, it would look like a kaleidoscope. You've got Taiwanese in here and in here. You've got some Vietnamese. You've got some Filipino in here. That's Chinese. And in through here, you've got a hodgepodge, including our rusty freighter on a shoal. And it was cheap, but it worked. So it is a potential conflict point. But if you ignore China's historic understanding of itself in this region, you do so at your peril. The only other nation that has a historical claim at all is Vietnam. And theirs is nowhere near as old, to be honest.
It's what, 1400?
Yeah. Yeah, 1400s. One of the high points in Vietnamese history. One of the more powerful points vis-a-vis China. For a lot of human history, China ruled what's big hunk of what was North Vietnam.
What was so important when the United States went in for the Vietnam War?
Oh, Vietnam War?
What
Well-
was the reason?
The domino theory, as much as anything else.
Yeah.
The French had been in there, French Indochina, after the war, well, it was French, this was claimed by France through the 30s, along with French Indochina. The Japanese took it all over during World War II. They lost it after the end of World War II.
Yeah.
France came back in and attempted to keep this colony. However, there was a guy named Ho Chi Minh and a group of rebels who, right after the war, went to Washington, D.C. for help. They wanted to be an independent country. Ho Chi Minh, one of his mentors was George Washington, believe it or not.
Mentors?
Mentor. No, mentor. Someone he looked up to.
Yeah, okay.
One of his heroes.
One of his, that's better word.
Yeah, one of his heroes.
Better is contemporary.
Okay. One of his heroes was George Washington. We gave him a butterfly collection. No military help. He then turned to the Soviet Union. He got guns. He got all kinds of help. China helped. So an insurrection started. The French were having a very hard time fighting the insurgents. There was up in this area, the French set up a major fortification, concentrated their army, were surrounded and defeated.
Dien Bien Phu?
Ben Phu, yes, Dien Bien Phu. So in '54, the country was divided. The South became South Vietnam, the North became North Vietnam, both countries became independent. This one was run by Ho Chi Minh, this one was run by a, can't say democracy, a dictator, but a Western-backed dictator. And then the French, increasingly, it became obvious, couldn't support it because of the Viet Cong and continuing insurgency. So then we started getting involved with advisors as early as '59 under the Eisenhower administration.
Well, Eisenhower?
Yeah, just advisors, not
Oh,
troops.
okay, because of
A few hundred
Johnson.
advisors.
I've been,
Yeah, a few hundred advisors.
the last 2 nights on public television, they've had Vietnam on it, and I was
Okay.
watching it.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the decisions that President Johnson made after talking to McNamara,
Yep.
he went ahead and did
Yep.
against
The
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 Congress.
Kennedy administration pretty much stayed out of it, but we were still involved with advisors, low
Right.
level. But then in the Gulf of Tonkin, allegedly an American aircraft carrier was attacked. I say allegedly because there's some evidence it never happened.
Mhm.
So, depends on who you talk to.
Tonkin Bay Resolution.
Tonkin Bay Resolution gave Johnson free hand, 50,000, no, 500,000 U.S. troops to fight the
And he
insurgents.
kept it a
No, not,
secret.
I'm sorry.
They kept it a secret from the country for a while.
Yeah, the idea was, I'm sorry, it wasn't 500,000. That would have actually
No,
worked.
No, it wasn't.
I want to say about 50,000 U.S.
Yeah.
troops, about the size of one U.S. corps, to go in, to root out the insurgents. We tried hearts and minds, we tried all kinds of things, except what works. Because I used to teach this counterinsurgency. If you want to stop an insurgency or a terrorist group, you can do it. It's a matter of numbers, it's math. But it's expensive, it's bloody, and it takes a long time.
Yeah.
What it would have meant was having enough U.S. forces and allied South Vietnamese forces to occupy every village, every hamlet, every district of every city with enough force to control it. Because then, where would the Viet Cong hide their ammunition? You gotta have a village, you gotta have some kind of logistical support. Nowhere to do it, because there's enemy troops everywhere. And you get ratted out. And so eventually you get to the point where the resistance leaders say, this is hopeless, I give up. And that's when you enter insurgency. When the losers say, I quit. We tried to do war on the cheap. We had nowhere near enough troops, and we were saying, oh, we'll be in and out of there in a couple of years.
And they kept trying to build a political will, and they were never successful.
No, because Ho Chi Minh was a national hero. He's the one who fought the Japanese.
Well, no, I mean in the United States, there was never any great demand to go over there
No,
and,
no. It's like, what are we doing there?
yeah.
What was that song? What are we fighting for? I don't give a damn. Next stop's Vietnam.
You know, everybody laughed at that,
Yeah.
you know.
But it was a domino theory. Whoops. Okay, come on back. Thank you. The domino theory was a Vietnam went communist. Then we go down to Malaysia, Indonesia. It would be a domino effect. They'd all become communist states. Well, that really isn't how things turned out. But at the time, he believed it. So the thought was, draw the line in the sand here. Be a bulwark for democracy. But the South Vietnamese weren't really in love with their own government. It was just one dictator after another. Okay, so the Viet Cong come through, they steal our goods, they pillage and rape. Then here comes the South Vietnamese government, they steal our food, they pillage and rape. I'm sorry to be blunt, but that's what they did. So you're a local villager, who do you support? None of the above.
Well, and also the soldiers, our soldiers who were over there, several of them, when they were being interviewed, had said that it was difficult because you could never tell which one was Viet Cong, or which was which
Right.
one was the enemy and
Armies
which
don't
one?
wear uniforms
No.
anymore, do they?
Right.
But that was an insurgency. Now, but here's the thing, we didn't read our own history. In 1904, we were fighting an insurgency against the Philippine nationals. They didn't want to wait till 1945, they wanted independence now. We successfully squashed that insurgency. We put enough troops in enough locations so that they finally gave up. Malaysia, interesting enough, Malaysia in the 50s was a British colony at the time. They successfully stopped an insurgency. How? They put enough troops in enough places and waited until they gave up. There are sometimes tricks you can use, like in El Salvador, where we basically told the government, remember that insurgency, how that just kind of went away in El Salvador? No accident. No accident. Started by us leaning on the government of El Salvador. Cut out the death squads, cut out the abuses, or we're cutting off aid. And they did. They cut that garbage out. Then we helped the Salvadorian government provide electricity to the rural areas, which was the strength of the insurgency. Now, you've never had electricity. I now have a light bulb. That is cool. Yay, government. Then the leftists start bombing the power lines. Now I don't have electricity. Who did that? The leftists. They lost their support. And if the population doesn't tolerate a terrorist, they have nowhere to hide. The population will turn them in. So they gave up. But we tried to do war on the cheap here, and just like Iraq, it doesn't work. But our political leaders love it. The Democratic president for Vietnam was a Republican president for Iraq. They both did the same thing. They both got the same results. But I digress. Anything else on the South China Sea? Okay. Thank you for your time.
It's interesting.